Hello, welcome back. This is the Solarpunk Sangha, episode 5, Development and Capital, and introducing Deconomy, a economics course related to sustainability, related to mutualism, and a whole lot of different topics that we need to cover down the line. But today is October 9th, 2024. It's the day or the kind of afternoon before Hurricane Milton is going to land on the west coast of Florida. Um, I would just hope and pray that people on the west coast are going to be safe. Let me just show you a quick update actually. In Naples, my dad's friend sent me, it says Naples is already underwater and he isn't here yet. So let me flip my view on my screen so I could, yeah. Anyway, so it's going to be a bad one, for sure. I don't want to, sound so down about it. Um, it's just a fact of life. It's a fact of nature. It's a giant force of nature, only being fueled more and more by natural gas and oil extraction, as well as poor infrastructure, as well as just capitalism being a giant waste of resources, both human and planetary, all for blood money. So we're in an interesting time, and we need to think about different paradigms shifts that we all engage with on our day to day. Just because you think you're not in a situation where you can participate in more democratic usage of resources here. And what I'm saying is that you don't really have a say by force of legislation and legislators or paid off to tell you otherwise, that their profit is more important than the planet. And that's what we're going to fight against um, in this exploration. And today, we're just doing something simple. I'm kind of exhausted from the preparation it takes. Here on Southeast Coast in Broward, we're going to be fine. Not the best conditions. There's going to be damage. There's going to be a lot of property damage. Insurance rates are going to go up, all that. But life has to move on beyond what we think this refinancing and recapitalization market that exists to prey here in Florida. It's just you are a, you know, your blood in the water when you buy a home here or anything surrounding that. Given Helene, Milton, and so on are just immediate examples of your money not going to infrastructure. And what I mean by your money not going to infrastructure, since the genocide in Israel began, since the genocide in occupied Palestine in Gaza began, um, was it 18 billion just went for arms and weapons shipments? Why? Um, yeah, so we'll dive into my thoughts on that in a more written format. But today, two big things. We're going to watch Ha-Joon Chang, a South Korean professor of economics, and his new school. I think it's called New School. What is this called? He's a professor of developmental economics, I believe, off the top of my head. That was his position when he recorded this video series on YouTube. Let me just take a peek at what is it called? New Economic Thinking is the YouTube channel. And his series is called Economics for People. It's going to be a great watch. Not every video we're going to go through. Today, we're probably just going to do a couple of the initial videos, as I think, and I put the link for the channel, the playlist in the Super profile and on this event card, so you could see more or if you want to watch independently on your own, you can go and check it out. It is a very well produced series on the history of economic and development, and what development is from the perspective of degrowth, from the perspective of mutual aid, and as the aforementioned militarization, which is primarily what the blood money comes from, right? Military industrial complex. We all know that stuff. And if you don't know, and it's your first time, you're like, huh? Military industrial complex causes global warming? How? Ask yourself that. And it's going to be obvious when you start looking at the Middle East. And then the second part, we're going to go over, or second part, we'll do that first. We're going to cover just an overview of what I would posit as a community operating system, which is a exploration program development. And as we're starting with that, as well, well, the idea is, if you've ever worked in project management in the past, this is kind of like the ultimate playbook. Here I am trying to market an idea, right? Because with economics, etc. And while I'm saying that, in good marketing, I have a shirt, a little crab on it. You see him? Oh, so cute. However, it's if you haven't, this is not a sponsored shout out, but if you've ever been to Hollywood Beach in Florida, Billy Stone Crab, go and get your some seafood while you can, because it's very busy, always packed, but the food is delicious. The people there are great. And the aforementioned crab and capitalism, Mr. Krabs, that's a great SpongeBob reference. If you haven't watched SpongeBob SquarePants in the past, or even as an adult, it's really, really, really funny. The character of Mr. Krabs is just a blood-sucking capitalist, right? And anything with money, he is going to walk. Oh man, I mean, it's the '90s had such great writing. Some things we have to kind of go back and revisit and go like, oh, these people were kind of creeps in Nickelodeon. If you don't know the Dan Schneider situation, I'm not going to blame you, but that ruins a lot of childhoods. A lot of the '80s, '90s, '70s, anything from television growing up has just been a major disappointment. Now we're getting that with Diddy, of course, being like the Black Epstein of the rap industry. And unfortunate for all of us, we're kind of subject to the repercussions of their economic advancement, whether you see that sort of industrious black market in the literal terms. I'm not saying Epstein, Diddy kind of thing. All of that is just like power dynamics, political economy. It literally is, if you think about it. And I don't want to jump into the whole Epstein rabbit hole. You already know what I'm referring to, of course, with regards to who he represented. And Diddy is the interesting one. He's going to take down a lot of people. It's going to be a revelation. I've already kind of divested artists from playlists, because it's just like, I'll keep it one private. I'm not going to put that shit in public. But Diddy was never talented. I hate to say it. Like, as when Puff Biggie died, and then him and was it Faith Hill made the song. Brilliant song, lovely songs, but that's like the only thing I could appreciate. But even then, that's going to be subject to scrutiny, because how far back this is going to go, how many years he's been doing this, and these are economic things, because people pursue themselves to be emulating these people, right? Um, including their relationship to the economy, including their relationship to the parasites who are billionaires, right? Including their relationship to they themselves in their economy, their local economic situation, right? So if you're just investing into poor ideas, it's going to back caveat emptor, right? The Latin phrase "buyer beware." Um, don't buy his vodka. Don't buy anything from rappers. It's like, they gin you up to be a multifaceted product line with a face, until that face goes bad. We'll see. Yeah, so let me pause there because we spent 10 minutes talking about hurricanes and Diddy. But to recap, the first objective of our conversation on program management, we have to look at what's the current AI situation is, and how that affects jobs, because in the long term, people are going to use resources to capitalize against workers and communities and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Because it's economical to use BSAI, that's going to be a phrase, BSAI, to self-enrich, to divest, and by divesting, you don't pay people enough to support themselves, right? So there's high turnover. There's a lot of, when you study the causes of the effects, a lot of these concepts begin to connect, but it's really just boiling down to greed, right? And typically with program management and the type of tasks that are listed for a successful program to be run, we have to look at AI as a controversial point of when it is appropriate to use, if at all. I'm leaning more on the if at all portion of it. Outside of biomedical services, research to help the planet, people, etc., to live more healthily and just sustainably altogether, that's fine. Nobody will ever question that. But in regards to, I think, the bulk usage of what we see today, it's just copying a bunch of stuff on Google or other people's work and not accrediting them for it. So why that is important is that when we look at the long-term, just the general sustainability of a program, we have to constantly evaluate a playbook. What are the actions do we do in the right steps and right orders, if necessary, facilitate a equitable mutual system, right? We don't have that today, in the sense that a outline of process, program, and project management intertwine with community development. Why I say that is, question your local government's capacity to govern economic redistribution of resources, right? And what I mean by an economic redistribution, it's always going to be the highest bidder. There is a bidding process, and typically people who assert their legal case and lobby themselves typically secure the most capital. Capital being people capital. You have the actual flow of workers. You have the representation within the government, the local government, and that sort of relationship building. So there's just a lot that needs to kind of be evaluated of how the local aspect can be, shot up to the quote unquote national. We're going to talk about nationalism, but the federation of states that we have today. How do we work through that system? Or the current rights that you as an individual have, Weingarter rights, labor organization rights, all of that stuff. So let me share my screen. And what I want to share real quick is not this page. I actually meant this tab instead. Okay, so let me get back to my screen and put myself here. Okay, so if you are unfamiliar with process and program management, it is, and even project management as a whole, it is conducive to you to learn these things as a way of systematizing and organizing your focus and attention. A lot of people just wing it throughout life. They don't think about an important cooking principle as you clean as you go along. Developers know this as well, is making sure your code is very neat and tidy, so that if there is a handover or you move around different departments, your code is going to be legible, or your kitchen setup is going to be consistent, right? So the consistency is what I'm targeting in describing a program management process. And the reason why it's important to have just even if it's a rough introduction to some of the elements that we're talking about, this gives us an opportunity to expand on a total process management for, let's say, a library. As I described in a previous video, it would be ideal if the Sangha expands to local spaces, and what exactly would that look like in different applications. So example, a bookstore would have a whole range of things that need to be targeted, such as facility management, such as inventory management, pay, training, etc. Like there's a volume of things that could feel overwhelming. So this is my way of just synthesizing what I've discovered over the years professionally, as not just in design, but interfacing with a lot of different companies in helping them establishing, project management that they didn't have, or project management standards that they didn't have. So in doing so, this graphic that I have on the screen outlines a comparison between Tiago Forte and his PARA organization scheme, project areas, resources, archives. You can go to fortelabs.com and just find this article that explains the logic in creating zones for task management. And I think that sentence alone solidifies the overall approach of what what I'm comparing it to with my system, a more sustainable long-term outlook of how everything across a organization can be organized into a very easy to learn program outline. And I'm going to do a walkthrough of that on a different browser. I'm just showing you this exploration, which you can find on my portfolio, rabbitbadge.design, and then you'll go to popular education, and it will be the popular education chapter. So with that, you can see that there's a hierarchy of categories. Now, when you do basic project management, the first thing is creating a template for for you to repeatedly just onboard new projects, give a full dossier. Typically, that's being handled by AI. ClickUp, for example, is a product project management software, and their AI is very targeted to the the business categories, and using that. So if you wanted to say like create a template for educational lesson, um, covering this, and this, and it will break it down for you. It'll find someone else's work, consolidate it, and then give you a template version, lorem ipsum, if they have to. Um, so, so I'll show you that in just a sec. But the idea is you have connected workflows that are typical across organizations, um, and then you just flesh out the bigger categories that fall under that. So with project management, you have program management, project initiation. So you just have like your initial start here, copy this, copy this, copy this. So let's say with monitoring and control, on the Sangha, we have a rhizome Airtable that covers all the key results that we're keeping track of. So these are things that to keep in mind of the different metrics and assets that can be incorporated into your larger categories. And then, of course, you just refine everything further down the line, depending on the nature of the content of the category here, right? So monitoring and control, you have your meetings. We talked about that with Civic Notes. With the idea of workers being able to vote on things that happen at these meetings, even if they can or cannot be, in place, and they have a full feed for them to keep track of, um, as well as notes, your typical minutes that are spit out at the end, so that people can verily account for what has been done within the project and reduce the costs down the line. It sounds great, but it's just a lot of spreadsheets, bro. Anyone with the right mind will probably be like, I'm going to roll my eyes at the back of my head for a bit. So let me stop sharing on this side, and let me go to the window, and then let's go to... Good morning, pineapple. You're looking very nice. Where is it? Okay, so this is a strange occurrence. I'm trying to share a different window because this could not share screen. Grant access, security. Oh, that's why. Okay, well, I could do that on... Oh, that's strange. Window. Oh, I'm blind. That's why. Okay, so you can see on my screen the same breakdown, discovery, ideation, etc. And without getting... I still need to do a goddamn for these live streams. I kind of customized it just to the Sangha, but this space also represents a variety of workflows that are interconnected, that are necessary for keeping the app going, different things that are needed for live streams, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So Sangha products, this is kind of like the essence of what is being offered. The planning and documentation that is posted on the donate page. I'm not really doing anything anymore in the Research Depot, but initially, if I were to compile and thinking out loud, just to put it into use, you have Deconomy. Let me just make sure my screen... Okay, I'm okay. You have, the outlook of all these development topics that we're going to watch on the Haji Chang video in just a moment. So think of it as like, it's not really applicable for me in all areas. And really. It's just, the process of researching, internal research, external research, with customers, with um, uh, financial reports. It's an interconnected place for research. Um, Three, and ideation. This is something that I was planning to do kind of like as a live stream process, but it's called the Sacred Timeline. As you can imagine, it's from the poorly written Marvel universe now. I have no idea what they're doing with Doctor Doom and Robert Downey Jr. Not going to get into that. However, these artifacts are going to be in production of future lessons. So it's just a way for me to internally organize and say, how do I explain the development of capitalism, whether you want to go back to 1492 and start from there? I think that's, the general reasonable place to be. But when you're talking about the sacred timeline, you're talking about, what came before 1492, right? And the precedent that led up to Christopher Columbus sailing the ocean blue. Design system. This is more or less Figma, and later on organizing it to become shareable. If you want to copy and emulate the color scheme design things that I have created in Figma, it's going to be there. Like how to do the lesson placards, what we saw on my portfolio. Testing ground. So if you've ever done any prototyping in the past, this is the half of the double diamond, right? The second half is like the actual production and more team and department oriented. So it's a synthesis of all of these, the left side of a double diamond, which is a design process that starts with research, basically starts with the research and works its way through the design and reiterates as it goes along the way. But the problem with that model is that it could work with other departments in their production of content and material. So if you're building physical products, for example, you need to do research. You need to have artifacts or ideations. You have to have a design system for branding, marketing, consistent, brand specs and all that stuff. So all of it kind of incorporates into half of what we can consider the program process is. And then you have a variety of products and resources that are built. For example, if 6 is product, then the LMS is the thing that needs to be kept up to speed, and all of our educational products. So a bunch of lists that go on that are involved with that. Media management. This is what I do for SuperPeer and for lessons, written lessons as well. The central management for that. Vinaya, if you're not familiar, that is the Buddhist Sangha governance protocols. As I mentioned before, with facility and all that. It's just this is basic organizational governance. I just call it that because it's to go and read it sometime down the line. 9 with identity, branding, brand marketing, etc. This is just for me to keep up to snuff with all the other things I will show you in just a moment. But yeah, no, it's just keep all of your social media together, and it just helps to that's my planner. Yeah, so social media, don't need to see too much of that. It's all the apps consolidated into one, and what campaign and campaign management strategies that are available at the time, or at least for the exploration. I had a very structured process of going into this whole thing, but I realized I kind of wing all of it. Just let it be. Okay, so for sustainability, take all of your topics, right? And this is where I do the bookmarking. Where's my mouse? Here we are. Right. So this is Raindrop. And in case you were wondering, on every single media library page that you find on the website, this is how you plug and chug these URLs into the page. I'll show that probably on a private one because I don't want to put that as for public consumption. Okay, so that's quick and simple look at the use of it here using the Sangha. There are varieties that could be spun up per app, per organization. If you were to join a different company and they have their own way of organizing things, then it's probably safe to keep it in mind. But if you find your method or this method better in incorporating and getting your work done better, then use it. I don't care. If it doesn't, then we don't. So yeah. Okay, so let's jump into, and of course, if you have comments, questions, definitely go and check out the website. I will be building guides this week and in the upcoming weeks to push more of this program process out of the way. Ideally, the content will be translated into a blog post so that it's more visible, SEO and all that jazz. But it's just how I work. I think it's a very adaptable strategy for almost every application that I've worked on and every organization that I've worked on as well. And it's a bookmarking strategy. It's an information structure. It's a lot of different things rolled up into one. But it's just a personal workflow, and I hope it helps you. So let's play a YouTube video. I got it here. Now, I'm going to pause it so we could... Yeah. So let me bring myself back. Do I have the book? I didn't come prepared, but I have the physical book. When the video is playing, I'll go grab the necessary books, and we'll save that towards the end. But let's introduce Ha-Joon Chang. He's a South Korean professor of economics. This is a series called Economics for People. It's about maybe 10 hours in total. Highly recommend watching it. Subscribe to that channel, New Economic Thinking. It's just a rich variety of information with the different perspectives of development as we know it, economics as we know it, and the fallacies and that people often learn, usually not through an academic setting. So this is kind of like the bridge to see how larger forces at play affect your day-to-day. So let me...
There are many different ways of changing the world. In order to understand the real world economy, you need to know quite a bit about the real world. I'm Ha-Joon Chang from University of Cambridge. Economists seem to have a case of megalomania. These are people who cannot even explain what they are supposed to do. And then they come out and say, oh, by the way, we can explain everything else. Yeah? Economists are not encouraged to try to bring in the insights from philosophy, sociology, history. When their policy failed, they suddenly rediscovered history, geography, culture. Economics needs to be reformed to improve the world rather than serving the interests of a narrow elite. This widespread pessimism encouraged by mainstream economists, these old people saying, keep government out of my Medicare. Hello, Medicare is a government program. Economists say that whatever is happening in the economy is happening because it has to happen. Inequality is rising. Yes, that's because of globalization. Manufacturing industries are declining. Yes, that's because of Chinese competition. Neoclassical economists came along and said, no, we have to turn this into science. Get rid of subjective value judgments like ethics and politics. However diverse it may look, economics still offers only one way of looking at the world. You have to recognize the limitations of abstract theories and be more humble about what you can tell other people to do. Welcome to the lecture.
Yeah. Okay. So let's go to number 2. What is number 2? Nature of economics. Yeah. Okay. Nature of economics. No. I want you to play that. Oh, just copy and paste. So that's a teaser video. There we go.
It is extremely important for our democracy to function that ordinary citizens understand the key issues and basic theories of economics. Now, if you ask people who haven't studied economics, what is economics? The usual answer will be, well, it must be the study of the economy. Chemistry is study of chemicals, biology is study of living things. So economics must be the study of the economy. That would be a commonsensical answer, but interestingly, that would be wrong, at least according to the most popular economics books of our time. Look at these titles. In the middle, there's Free Economics, which is probably the best-selling economics book ever, other than textbooks. And they claim that they are looking at the hidden side of everything. The Logic of Life, the second book by Tim Harford, the famous Financial Times journalist of the undercover economist fame, he subtitled his book also as New Economics of Everything. And there is Professor Robert Frank from Cornell University in America, who is much more modest because he says why economics explains almost everything, not literally everything. But you can see from this that economists these days claim that they can actually explain everything. But this is some claim coming from people who have basically messed up what other people think is their main job, namely explaining the economy and keeping it prosperous, stable, and innovative.
Total turmoil in Wall Street.
We have seen the worst financial and economic crisis since the Great Depression in the 1920s, back in 2007 and 2008. Now, before this happened, economists are making big claims. Robert Lucas, the famous Chicago economist, in his presidential address of the American Economic Association in 2003, declared that economics has solved the problem of preventing recessions.
This is what financial Armageddon looks like. Red screens that scream sell, sell, sell.
Stock markets around the world collapsed today. In Britain, the stock market fell sharply by 5%.
The markets now believe that we are on the cusp of a sharp and prolonged recession.
Fears for the ripple effect that could engulf the world economy.
Well, only 4 or 5 years later to see the biggest recession since the Second World War. People are making all kinds of claims that we have solved the world's problem. Ben Bernanke, the former professor of Princeton and former chairman of the...
By the way, this is all pre-COVID. However, it is all super relevant to see how the impending economic collapse has collapsed multiple times.
Federal Reserve Board, the American Central Bank, talked about the Great Moderation. Now we have basically abolished the business cycle. Everything is going along nicely, moderately, maybe a slight fluctuation, but we have basically reached a state of nirvana. Well, he didn't use the term, but that was the message.
It's a misunderstanding of the word, because typically it's a letting go instead of bliss, right? We'll get to the Buddhist enlightenment.
So given this, you would say that economists seem to have a case of megalomania. These are people who cannot even explain what they are supposed to do. And then they come out and say, oh, by the way, we can explain everything else. This is a very particular form of megalomania because it's not baseless. I mean, it has a methodological foundation, this particular form of megalomania, claiming that economics can explain everything. Lionel Robbins, a leading British economist, defines economics as a science which studies human behavior as a relationship between ends and scarce means, which have alternative uses. And this is the definition of economics that most economists, namely economists who belong to the dominant neoclassical school, have defined economics as. All other subjects define.
That's like the Chicago School. A lot of London had one, but mostly Chicago.
Serves with reference to the subject matter of study. But somehow economics is defined by its analytical methodology rather than its substance, its subject matter. That is the study of the economy. How we produce things, how we distribute the income that come out of that production process, and how we exchange and consume things. This should be the central subject of economics, not how, as free economics talks about, American school teachers cheat in student assessment, how Japanese sumo wrestlers behave rationally despite their stupid looks and stuff like that. Now, I'm not saying that those the observations are totally irrelevant. I mean, they give you some insight to human behavior.
It just looks at human behavior as a deterministic, reductionist, material-driven activity. Reductionists being logically, if they need to survive, all the parts that we look at from a financial perspective, it's kind of just prospectively limited to that, meaning an economist is only going to look at dollars and cents. Lines go up, lines go down. They can make you be literate in that, but it doesn't make anyone materially better off, because what Chang is mentioning on Hajun Chan, I have his book somewhere. I'm struggling to find it. I have to go back and find it right now. Yeah, so it's the impetus of reducing everything down to systemic parts and evaluating, oh, you're a brown or black individual, oh, you have low income, all of these calculated effects. So the reductionist, materialist viewpoint will be, and deterministic, will be, you are categorized in this really awful way of saying, or calling you, you're poor or you're impoverished, right? So it's perspective. Economics is purely perspective.
But that is not the main subject of economics. And applying rational choice theory outside the economy actually gives you a very distorted view of human nature and human society. One important consequence of defining economics in terms of its analytical methodology is to make economists, that is a dominant neoclassical school, believe that there's only one right way of doing economics. But there are many different schools of economics. There are at least 9 main schools of economics, and several more if you count smaller schools or split bigger schools into sub-schools. And I have actually highlighted 3 of them in bold because these are all economic theories that support free market policies. But they all do that in different ways. Neoclassical economics does this on the basis of individualist approach, based on the understanding that human beings are rational and selfish. Insofar as neoclassical economists advocate free market policy, I'm saying insofar as because there are some neoclassical economists like Joseph Stiglitz and Paul Krugman who will be quite willing to support a wide range of government interventions based on the theories of market failure. But insofar as neoclassical economists support free market policy, their position is, look, people know what they are doing, so just leave them alone. Yeah? That's the best policy. Now, the classical school, the school of Adam Smith and David Ricardo, also advocated the free market policy, but they did it on the basis of a very different economic theory. Because the classical economic theory was based on class analysis. Of course, there was some discussion of individuals and freedom and that kind of thing, but that was more at the level of political rhetoric. The central analytical construct was based on this notion that the society and the economy is made up of three different classes, all with different objectives and behavior. So it is the capitalist class, the working class, and the landlord class. The workers basically get subsistence wage. They are given only just enough to survive. So they will consume everything they are given. The landlords have surplus, but they are unproductive class, and they would waste their money on luxury consumption like hunting lodge and servants and so on. And the
South Florida is full of it, right? Not just landlords in general, just parasitic industries. It's just old money trying to recirculate, but it's miserly spent.
Are the people who invest and make the economy grow. So you should maximize its surplus that goes to the capitalist class. So that's a very different theory of why free market policy is good. The third free market school, probably the most ardent supporters of free market, is the so-called Austrian school, represented by people like von Hayek and von Mises. The Austrian school supports free market far more strongly than the classical or the neoclassical school, but the way they do it is yet again different. Because the Austrian argument is that human rationality is limited. We can only understand what is immediately around us. That limited knowledge gets synthesized by the market mechanism, and that's why free market is great. But when they say that the government shouldn't intervene, it's not because the individuals know better. It's because governments doesn't know better. So when the world is uncertain, our rationality is limited, how dare you, the government, presume that you know better than the individuals? So that's a very different argument from the neoclassical defense, which is that everyone knows what is going on, so leave them alone. Now, this is just one illustration, but basically what I'm trying to say is that there are many different ways of theorizing about the economy. I argue that we should...
His point, where am I? His point is actually, very well taken in the sense that socialist economics gets very mired down in comparing everything to Marx. And yes, capital is Das Kapital 1, 2, throw in 3. 1 and 2 pretty much is the bulk of his writings, and then you have Engels coming in later on line and set that aside. But everyone treats it like a religion, implying that there is a lack of perspective because it's so revelatory that you forget that his opinion is just one of many ways of looking at it. He was very accurate in description of I have Capital PDF, Volume 1 PDF in the Super-Peer class notes, so you can go and check that out. But yeah, no, even Haju Chang is one individual amongst a more accurate reading and perspective of political economy as compared to Freakonomics, what he was critiquing earlier, which is the mass-produced capitalist consumption, economic theory produced for the sake of economic theory crowd.
also let these schools work together. Because the world is very complex and no single theory can explain it. And to talk about this, I refer to what I call the Singapore problem, or life is stranger than fiction. Now, when you read about Singapore in standard textbooks or the financial press like the Wall Street Journal or the Economist magazine, you will only hear about this free trade policy and its welcoming attitude towards foreign investors. But you will never be told that 90% of land in Singapore is owned by the government. You will never be told that 85% of housing is provided by government-owned housing corporation. A staggering 22% of GDP is produced by state-owned enterprises, including the famous Singapore Airlines.
A question for you. This is akin to guaranteed housing. Is Singapore technically a state? It's a republic of sorts. But yeah, their government pretty much owns the island. You pay a lot of taxes. But what is guaranteed to you? Keep that in mind, right? So they have 80% of housing is like, who the hell owns a private house in Singapore, right? And for what reasons? Setting that aside, it's a very significant observation that he's talking about a land and geography and cultural history without investing into what led up to that exchange. That is a subject later down the line with East Asian, Southeast Asian political economy. Chen himself lived under military dictatorship, which he describes in I don't know if in this video or the additional videos of like post-World War II response and economic recovery that happened or didn't happen under occupation. So, which the U.S. pretty much occupies South Korea anyway. Half of South Korea is pretty much a Seoul, and then you got like a bunch of military installments. Korea, I want to go there. His book, 23 Things They Don't Tell You About Capitalism. I will read off the index to tell you, and then you can go and find the book and to read his arguments. It's very good.
I mean, that 22% outside the oil economy, this is literally the highest ratio. So I often put it to my graduate students, give me one economic theory, doesn't matter what it is, neoclassical, Keynesian, Marxist, that can single-handedly explain Singapore. I dare say there is no such theory. Now, despite this inherently...
To repeat what he's iterating on is the notion that there is a heterodox economic approach that needs to be applied to Singapore, and the fact that you need to apply a heterodox approach as opposed to singling out economic schools like classical, neoclassical, Chicago, Marxian, the whole range of economics. There's going to be a great graph, I believe, maybe in this video or the next video, that describes his thought process behind, that describes the most of the schools. But all you need to do is just go to heterodox economics on Wikipedia, and you will probably find the diagram that looks at the history of capitalism and the economic systems that emerged from 1492 and on, right? So that includes the American schools, the British schools, the Austrian, German, if you want to incorporate all that was going on in the German revolutions, plus the, not revolutions, but the decline in Germany Empire, Paris Commune, all that stuff is kind of incorporated into a heterodox approach. So you heterodox economics. This is what he's talking about and describing.
Pluralistic nature of economics. Most economists today belonging to the neoclassical school believe that economics is
And, this is like a white tower argument. Look at the setting that he's in Cambridge, right? Or wherever this was located in filming. It's a variety of students well off, learning from, very well received economists, but he's telling you that you have to look beyond what you're being told. Otherwise, you're going to fail at accounting for factors of reality that affect the dollars and cents, which is the current political usage of, like, let's say your money, right? Instead of, some crypto bros are going to agree with the statement and say, oh yeah, we should use, cryptocurrency instead. I should say we get rid of money in the first place, right? And just move to a mutual system. How to do that, and recognizing, where your goods and services come from, like, it's going to rapidly change as a result of people owning their labor, which means it implies that habits, behaviors, expectations of privileged economic systems, such as here in the US. I'm just hinting at the notion of how Florida operates as well. It's purely retail and hospitality. Hospitality can't go away because it's a universe, it's a human to human interaction. Retail, though, we got better things to do with our land instead of just putting shopping malls over it. Yeah.
science in which there's an objective way of deciding what is right and what is wrong. So they often dismiss other schools for being unscientific. Basically, what this neoclassical school that emerged in the late 19th century has pursued is to turn a subject which in the beginning used to be called political economy into a science called economics. People used to be more honest in the old days. In the old days, no country had the Ministry of Defense. They were all called Ministry of War. So that people call economics political economy, acutely aware that this is based on power struggle between different classes. It's that it involves government intervention. We'll go back to that later. And called the political economy in the late 19th century, a bunch of economists that called neoclassical economists came along and said, no, we have to turn this into a science. Get rid of the subjective value judgments like ethics and politics. We have to turn it into science, and they succeeded in renaming the subject from political economy into economics.
Okay, so he's setting the stage in regards to how to evaluate your own perspective and approach towards economics, right? If you don't recognize that power and resources are interconnected, your welfare, your capacity to be who you want to be is kind of dictated by profit margins, right? In this day and age. So it is a very powerful kind of like perspective change to say, yeah, there's these old school schools that have systematized their approach, paid off people to really keep the same economic models, and their innovation is basically sending just calling different things and marketing and writing about it. That's SEO, right? I say that because it's the irony of economics is that where is it? Where's my bullshit jobs? Yeah, most of it is bullshit. I was just waving around debt the first 5,000 years, and was on a recent call. Sorry for hitting that. I was on a recent call with the Museum of Care. I think it was one of two organizations, Nika Dubrovsky. I have to, I'm going to say this right. Dubrovsky. Wow, I actually got that right the first time. But shout out to Nika, continuing on David Graeber's legacy. And we, there was a conversation with someone who was highlighting how Google and monopoly of trust is kind of falling apart because they're just simply getting ruled out by, I guess you could say, multiple legislative standards on data collection and management. So they can't do a, they just collect too much information and use it against you, right? And even that information, you can't really find useful information. So it's kind of a worthless product in a lot of regards. If you're looking for an alternative, I use EcoAsia. I think every search query generates something towards planting a tree. EcoAsia as a search engine replacement. Where are we? We're an hour and a half in. We can go and do another video, and then I'll do book recommendations, and we'll close out from there. This is a 35-minute one called 5 Reasons Why Economics is Political. I think it is a great video to consider and play, so let's play.
Economics cannot be free from value judgment, especially political value judgments. There are at least 5 reasons why this is the case. Well, the first reason is that economics.
Hold on. So I can't reshare. So never mind. After we're done, I'll come back to it. There's capital types, right? Political, economic, cultural, and ecological. And I further broke those down into 3 of each, like political, information, organizational capital, worker, labor, nature. There's a lot of variety of ways of looking at capital and how to typify it, right? Continued categorization of different activities and modalities of human production. But the point that he will kind of develop over this, is just look how easy it is to misread what is being taught in universities, the Freakonomics universities, against the reality and expectations that happen in a workplace, that happen in your day-to-day experience, whether that it's trying to work in an interface with a government, trying to work in an interface in a private company, etc.
Economics is in large part about government economic policy. It may be positive about it, it may be negative about it. There's even within neoclassical economics, there's the market failure approach, which says real-world markets often fail to produce the result expected in economic theory of perfect competition because of monopolies, because of externalities, because of public goods, and there are good reasons to intervene for the government to bring individual cost-benefit structure in line with social cost-benefit structure. Within the neoclassical school, there's also the government failure approach, corruption, inefficiency, bureaucracy. So, you may be positive or negative about the government intervention, but the point is that a lot of economics is actually about government policy. Even the idea of laissez-faire, that is a policy. Doing nothing doesn't actually mean literally not doing anything. It supports a particular type of government policy. The analysis of government policy within the neoclassical economics has developed much further. Because in the beginning, they said we are renaming the subject to get rid of the politics. But then, barely one generation after, along came Arthur Pigou, then professor of University of Cambridge, with this idea of externality, and from there developed a whole range of analysis called the market failure approach. No, frankly, if you apply this approach to its logical limit, there'll be very few areas where you cannot have government intervention, because markets fail all the time. And then, despite this pretension that we are getting out of politics, the subject actually has developed far more tools to analyze the policies and politics. Politics can influence the way economic research is done. So, for example, in the old days, under socialism, the government basically banned research on bourgeois neoclassical economics, unless it is done to criticize it. But it's not just the socialists, many right-wing dictatorships used to ban the study of Marxist economics. I grew up under military dictatorship in South Korea in the 1970s and 80s, and it was illegal to be in possession of books by, for example, Karl Marx. You could go to prison for that. It could be a bit more subtle than that. I mean, in the 1950s and 60s, under so-called McCarthyism in the United States, you had systematic persecution of Marxist economists in universities. Secondly, economically powerful people can and have influenced economic research through funding. There are many pro-free market think tanks like Institute of Economic Affairs in this country, or the Heritage Foundation and Cato Institute in America, that have been funded by the...
So Cato, FYI, if you're familiar with Project 2025, it's just a fascist implementation of policy. You're going to get it either way between Trump or Harris. And ideally, it's a situation that you work against in regards to organizing labor, to detach yourself again or away from American influence.
Rich people to generate research that justify free market approach. Even when there's no direct pressure on the economics profession to study particular types of economics, what is the main topic of research is very heavily influenced by the politics of the day. So right after the Second World War, full employment was on the top of research agenda for most economists, because that's when the society was reformed after the Great Depression and the Second World War, and the working class power rose with increasing unionization, coming to power of social democratic parties in many countries. So full employment, which was the concern for the workers, was at the top of research agenda. Since the 1980s, with the rise of so-called neoliberalism,
a double act that, for better or worse, changed the world.
Realignment of politics in many countries, full employment has basically more or less disappeared from the research agenda of economics. Inequality, which was supposed to be a non-issue until, say, 2005, 6, 7, is suddenly coming back as a popular item in research agenda for economists, because now there's a growing concern that the gap between the super rich and the rest is wide.
And exacerbated. So again, this is pre-COVID.
And this increasing gap is even negatively influencing things like democracy and civic rights and so on. So, there's now much greater concern about inequality. So we've already seen 3 ways in which politics can influence economics, but there's also causality in the other direction. Because economic theory actually affects the way the government, not just the economy, is organized. So in the socialist countries in the past, you had this Marxist theory that says the best way to organize the economy is to plan it centrally. Now, in order to do that, you basically have to create a huge government apparatus. You cannot just have one kind of central planning bureau.
Graeber, hold on, let me look. God damn it. Graeber. The Utopia of Rules. I have so many of his books, but let's go.
Kind of issuing projections and estimates. No, you need Ministry of Textile, Ministry of the Light Consumer Goods. You need the Ministry of Coal. In the capitalist countries in the last few decades.
So he's also highlighting the bureaucratic nature of USSR, right? Soviet Union was a worker council for every aspect of your life, which is a nightmare. It's great in the sense that it fills that legacy of standardization and practices, but it's awful given that it's just a bureaucratic nightmare, a slow block that's metastasizing from within, simply because they got out arms because nobody wanted to see them actually implement. Well, let me put it back to Lenin. He didn't want to see actual development. He just wanted to own people, be on top and exploit. Some people are going to be upset with that statement, but that's why Peter Kropotkin is also on top in regards to economic theory. You got Malatesta, you got so many, Bakunin as well, that we need to bring up later. We're going to get through Hadra Chang because it's one of my favorite reads.
Especially in the US, UK, Australia, New Zealand, influenced by the government failure approach, many countries have reorganized their government. Because the government failure approach recommends that you should shrink the size of the state to the minimum, but also introduce a lot of market principles. So these countries have privatized their state-owned enterprises. The UK used to have one of the biggest state-owned enterprise sector in the world. Not anymore. I mean, a lot of government activities have been outsourced.
And that's something, that goes back to Thatcher, right? I'm trying to organize all these goddamn books on my desk, and I don't have enough room. Okay, so Thatcher, Reagan, gutted state-run programs, right? That's where you get neoliberalism. That's where you get trickle-down economics, where money never trickles down; it only filters up. My impetus in pausing and reflecting on this is the effects of decolonization and the response to it. And it's important to look at Britain, UK, in perspective of the US today with Israel and their impending collapse. Whether I think it was the other day I mentioned it was a 27, I think it's like a $23 trillion project in Gaza, and the human life toll that's been calculated, right? Who's going to pay for that? I'm not. I'm only going to seek to redeem those who were affected by it. That includes educating people against why it had to happen which is political economy. Anthony Lowenstein, I didn't want to put this as a duplicate entry into the exploration, but Lowenstein mentions how all the technology that's pretty much used for occupation is exported around the world. We see that with the Cop City in Atlanta. We see that with the YPD, the whole Eric Adams situation, which is hilarious. We need to talk about that, but sometime soon. But yeah, you don't get a lot of opportunities to see how this affects you, like fascism coming home, until it's too late. And we've seen it on university campuses as well, like USC, I think it was, that did a economic round of of capital investment into policing their campuses. So what are you gonna do? You know what to do.
So in this country, you have a lot of the apparently public agencies which basically provide public services by contracting these out to private providers. These are not government services in the traditional sense anymore. You can see how powerful the influence of economic theories can be on the organization of the government as well as the economy. The third reason why economics is intertwined with politics is that all economic theories contain political value judgments. Many of the differences between different economic schools are due to their different views on economic things, like how technologies evolve, how market competition works. They all have different theories, but there are many differences that fundamentally come from differences in political value judgments. Now, sometimes these political differences are embodied in what look like a technical difference. The best example is the Pareto criterion, that is a central principle within neoclassical economics. Now, what is a Pareto criterion? Pareto criterion says that you cannot call a social change an improvement if it makes even a single person worse off. Now, in the beginning, when
it's like offering you a noose and tell you, how do you want to hang yourself? Hopefully he's going to dismiss this. I can't remember, but we can dismiss the notion, given he set up the argument that it's inherently political off of the value that you're establishing.
Neoclassical economics that emerged out of classical economics in the late 19th century. Neoclassical economics also subscribe to this idea of utilitarianism. You have heard of this, Jeremy Bentham, the greatest happiness of the greatest majority. In the early 20th century, Vilfredo Pareto, this half Italian, half French economist who taught in Switzerland, some of his followers came up and said, no, actually that is not acceptable. If you run the society in that kind of way, it means that you can demand sacrifice by a minority for the greater good. Let me give you a more intuitive explanation with what I call the one finger story. Tomorrow morning, someone knocks at my door. Oh, Dr. Chang, we found this marvelous technology that will solve the climate change problem overnight. And I say, oh, great, what is it? Well, never mind the details, but we came to you to ask for help. Well, I'm only an economist, I don't know anything about science. No, you can help. What is it? Oh, this machine has already been built. It's all primed up, ready to go, but we need one little input, which we want you to have the honor of providing. So I say, what is it? Well, we need one live human finger to start this machine. Yeah, well, even before they finish the sentence, I run into my kitchen, cut my little finger off, and give it to them. Well, what is one finger compared to the whole world? But what if it's one arm? Of course,
There's a Yakuza reference there. Shout out to anyone that's played Yakuza.
What if it's my life? Maybe. What if it's a life of my family? What if it's a life of 50 million South Koreans? Or 70 million North and South Koreans? This is a problem with this utilitarian thinking. Because, you can always say, well, you can make a little concession. And then where do you stop? Where do you draw the line? Before you know it, you are in the same bed with Stalin and Hitler. The greater good. So Pareto was making a very powerful ethical point. You just cannot sacrifice individuals for the greater good. But what it is saying is also that you cannot touch the status quo. You might have a very unequal country, and someone might propose, if we raise taxes for the rich by this much and redistribute it to the poorest people, we can reduce poverty by this much, we can reduce inequality by this much. But if the people who are going to be taxed say no, you cannot do it if you believed in Pareto principle. So one person can veto the whole thing. Now, I'm not saying that there's an easy answer to this. In between absolute defense of the status quo and this the tyranny of the majority. But what I can with certainty tell you is that Pareto criterion is a very political position. In this context, my favorite quote comes from this Brazilian bishop called Dom Helder Camara, who was one of the leaders of the so-called liberation theology, which was this radical Catholic theology that was popular in Latin America in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. I mean, some of the more extreme members actually advocated even armed struggle. And he once famously said, when I give food to poor people, they call me a saint. When I ask why they have not enough to eat, they call me a communist.
And that is the literal, definition of mutual aid, right? To give to the poor, to the oppressed. And again, I don't find armed resistance, to be a problem. You have to understand why it's there in the first place. And it's not an extreme, right? It's a very White Tower kind of viewpoint of reality.
No, I think as a trained social scientist, we should all become a bit of a communist. No, you should always question the underlying social order that is creating these problems. The limitations of Pareto criterion is that it doesn't ask.
He's defining it from the popular understanding of Marxism, implying communism, which is communism never has been achieved. USSR was a socialist. It was a socialist totalitarian approach towards life, right? Or towards the whole Cold War. It isn't to say that it materially provided people the resources they need, housing, food, job, etc., but it had to respond to the variety of fronts in order just not to be conquered and killed off, so you have to put in perspective that it's not, you have too many people with nuclear arms making awful decisions for the rest of the humanity, and given the opportunity to choose for themselves, they wouldn't choose the situation that they had, right? That's the reality, and it collapsed. And when I think it collapsed, when was it? November 89? I was already born. No, I wasn't already born. Anyway.
That question, it accepts the existing distribution of income and power, and then say, well, what if we do this is anyone is anyone going to get hurt? Yeah? So when you have things like that sitting in the very middle of neoclassical economic theory, how can you say that it is an apolitical, scientific understanding of the world? Yeah? Power is something that is very understudied in economics. Even political scientists whose central interest is power don't seem to be able to agree on a single definition. Within the dominant economic approach, that is the neoclassical school, there's only one kind of power, which is called market power. This is when someone has a monopoly, or a few firms have oligopoly, or someone has monopsony, which is the dominant position as a buyer. So there is that power, market power, within neoclassical economics, but other than that, power is not there. But even when there is no market power, there are at least 3 other forms of power that matter.
So, just to iterate on the previous monospony, the monopoly of the buyer, that is a universal healthcare system, as well as an interface for state-owned, who the state buys from the providers, and they provide the service and bill them. It gets redistributed through tax money and drives down overall costs because there's no middleman insurance company to dictate obscene prices. There is a political and economic motive to make the cost of healthcare go down, but we do not have a monopoly of buying power, monospony, as you described, in the US. So,
in our understanding of the economy, well, many neoclassical economists see the competitive market as a place devoid of power relationships, because market exchanges are voluntary. So under feudalism in Europe, the lord of the manor would demand that their serfs work, say, 3 out of 5 days in their field, rather than the serfs' own fields. Under the central planning system, the central planning authority would decide that, well, next year we are going to produce only black shoes, no pattern shoes. So they have to buy them. But within free market, there is no such authority. So people make these voluntary exchanges, and the thinking is, well, if it is not to their benefit, no one will go into these contracts. So for example, if there's a poor person in India, say, signing up to work in this factory that involves toxic chemicals, which he knows is likely to make him sick in the next few years, and probably going to kill him in the next 10, 15 years. If he signs up to this job, knowing this, neoclassical economists say, no problem. Yeah, the guy has made a calculation. But this interpretation ignores the fact that people with little independent means of income and wealth voluntarily do unpleasant things, dangerous things, things that are even sure to kill them in due course because they have no alternative. Karl Marx made a sort of career out of emphasizing this point, but even Adam Smith, in his book, The Wealth of Nations, there's this passage where he explicitly says that, well, basically workers have to accept whatever wages that are offered to them by the capitalists because they are not going to last even a week without working. In contrast, most capitalists can live very happily without employing any worker for a couple of years because they have money. Of course, they want to make more money, so that's why they are running factories where if the worst comes to worst, Okay, forget about that employing people. At least in the rich the capitalist countries, this imbalance compared to the days of Adam Smith or Karl Marx has shrunk quite a lot because the workers have the welfare state. They have trade unions that provide some, say, means of subsistence if they go on a strike and so on. But the imbalance is still there. And it might be actually increasing because of the increasing income inequality, the shrinkage in the welfare state in many, although not all, advanced capitalist economies, the weakening of trade unions, and the rise of the so-called gig economy in which workers are bogusly classified as independent suppliers and deprived of the workers' rights that are constituted in the laws. The second type of power is what I call the power to dictate things within organizations. What do I mean by that? Herbert Simon, the father of the behavioralist school, whom in one of my earlier books I called the last Renaissance man because he was originally trained as a political scientist, but then became one of the founding fathers of artificial intelligence and also studied psychology, management, and economics. In that article, he observed that, well, if you invited a Martian or some alien being to come and watch the Earth economy, how would it describe the Earth economy? Would they call it the market economy? Never. Because in his reckoning, something like 80% of economic decisions are made within organizations, like companies, governments, cooperatives. He was pointing to our neglect of this vast area of the economy, which does not work according to market principle. So within these organizations, basically there's a hierarchical power-based relationship. If you are...
This is what I meant by organizing the program management system the way it is. You just compel together the most consistent parts, and it works out.
Guide lower down the hierarchical chain, basically you will do what your superior tells you. There's no bargaining. Given that this the kind of relationship covers basically 80% of the economy, or at least a vast majority, not understanding this power relationship means that we are understanding only a smaller part of the economy. The third, the power to make people think what you want them to think. At the deepest level, this is the most important power. If you can do that, you don't need police, you don't need army, you don't need prison. People will do what you want. The most obvious example is advertising. Advertising provides you with certain information and influences your choice given your preferences, but it often goes deeper. It actually changes your preferences. This is why the advertisers love to use celebrities and
Buying shit you don't need.
Sports stars, because somehow people then get to associate this product with a high life, high achievement. People with money have and still do influence other people so that they acquire worldviews that are fundamentally against their own interests, but are good for defending the status quo. Karl Marx used to call this false consciousness. So given your objective interest as the struggling blue-collar worker in Midwest in the United States, why would you vote for someone like Donald Trump? So people...
Or Kamala Harris. I voted Jill Stein.
Said that these people have false consciousness. It's the false idea. Well, these days we call this the matrix. And there are numerous examples of false consciousness in history. So many slaves in the US, in Brazil, in the old days, they help their masters to oppress other slaves because they believed that this was the right social order. And how dare this the young guy that tried to break out of this order ordained by God. The scenes we have seen after the introduction of the so-called Obamacare, the healthcare reform that Barack Obama was trying to introduce into the United States, these old people saying, keep government out of my Medicare. Hello, Medicare is a government program. But these people have been so brainwashed by the American health insurance industry that government healthcare programs never work. They couldn't imagine that this nice little program that is helping them in his old age to cope with disease and other problems called Medicare is a government program. So understanding this the issue of false consciousness or the matrix is crucial in understanding economics. Most economists believe that politics is an irrational force that interferes with the rational workings of the market. We've seen this in this country in the run-up to the so-called Brexit referendum. Economists were coming out in great forces, arguing that this is going to destroy the economy. I mean, I'm not disputing whether they were right or wrong, and then when the people didn't vote the way they thought that they should, they started complaining, this is why democracy is bad for economic management. People don't understand these things. When people say things like this, the politics is an irrational force impinging on the rationality of the market and so on, what they are implicitly assuming is that there's a clearly scientifically definable boundary of the market into which political forces should not be allowed. So
That's the enclosure of the commons.
A lot of countries have done things to make that possible in the last few decades. A lot of countries have given political independence to the central bank. Because the argument was, if you let politicians dictate how monetary policy can be run, this irrational political considerations will come into the management of monetary policy. The problem with this argument is that actually there's no such objective boundary around the market that you can draw. My view is that the freedom of the market is in the eyes of the beholder. There's no scientific way to say up to this should be left to the logic of the market, and beyond that, you can have government.
It is a personal opinion, so I respect that. How you view the things that you interact with is part of the transpersonal psychology of non-duality, but also we will engage with Marshall McLuhan's work and really sit through some of his lectures on observing that inherent desire, craving for something. Thus, if you don't have the desire, or even if you boycott something, Israeli products, for example, and Israelis businesses as well, you will find that it's kind of everywhere. The medium is the message in that respect. And when you start to do a cross sustainability analysis with a tetrad, which we'll do as an exercise, you're going to find that statement made by the professor is a little bit Well, we gotta have a better way of looking at things and making people more comfortable consumers of their economic reality, right?
Government intervention. Let me give you an example. Child labor. In 1819, a bunch of reformist MPs in the British Parliament tabled this motion that was supposed to introduce this law to regulate child labor. And by today's standard, this was a joke. First of all, it was supposed to apply only to cotton textile. There were millions of children working in coal mines and working as chimney sweep and other types of factories, but it was supposed to be only for the cotton factory because this was considered particularly dangerous for children. At the time, the technology of producing cotton textile produced a lot of dust. And this dust would settle in the workers' lungs and cause disease. And a lot of children died in the cotton textile factories. So they said, okay, this is the worst case, so we are going to regulate that. And then they said, of course, we cannot ban all child labor. So we are going to regulate it. So they said very young children shouldn't work under the age of 9. Between 9 and 16, they could work, but only reduced hours. How many? 12. This is a time when adult workers were working 15, 16 hours a day. So 12 hours was considered light. But even then, a lot of people are up in arms. Parliamentarians, economists, factory owners. And the strongest argument was this regulation fundamentally goes against the foundation of the free market economy, namely the freedom of contract. These children want to work. Actually, they need to work. These people want to employ them. What is your problem? Well, fast forward 2 centuries. Today, no politician, no economist, at least in the rich countries, say we need to bring back child labor in order to truly make our labor market free. In many developing countries, where unfortunately there is still widespread child labor, in many developing countries, 40 to 50% of population is children, because they had recently very fast population growth. It's the biggest possible regulation that you can think of. You are basically potentially pushing half the labor force out of the labor market. No one sees it that way these days because we have accepted this different value. So that's why I said that, like beauty, freedom of the market is in the eyes of the beholder. And one person could say, wow, that's a free market. Another might say, well, what are you talking about? This is the most highly regulated market I've ever seen. George W. Bush, in his typical idiot savant way, put this point across beautifully when he was announcing the $700 billion bailout package for American banks following the 2008 financial crisis. He argued that what he was doing was the continuation of the American system of free enterprise, which rests on the conviction that the federal government should intervene only when necessary. But who decides when it is necessary? What economic theory do you use?
And inherently, what political theory are you applying as well? Because George W. Bush does not care about Black people, as Kanye West has stated. And it was clear with the economic disparity in recovery of Katrina, with people dying on their houses, on the roofs of their houses, and not getting evacuated on time. Then you have even the hurricane that's literally going to impact the floor, places that I lived in as well. Estimated at maybe $100 billion in damage as a result. Who knows? So in this vein, I would argue that defining
the free market is at the deepest level a pointless exercise because there's no such thing as a free market. All markets are constrained by institutions that determine who can participate, what can be exchanged, what are the rights and obligations of people who are involved in the process, how to run the exchange process, and so on. And all of these have underlying political and even ethical assumptions. Now, if you ask free market economists, do you really think there are, in reality, these textbook style free markets in existence? They'll probably say, well, I mean, that's an ideal, but there's the one market that comes pretty close to it, which is the stock market. Instantaneous price adjustment, very rapid spread of information. But does this mean that I can turn up at the doorstep of London Stock Exchange tomorrow morning with a bag full of the shares of my company and sell them? No. Why? Because I have to get listed. Okay, having been told that I have to list my company, I come back home and I call the London Stock Exchange and ask someone to list my company. Can I do it? No. Because you need the vetting process. Depending on the country, depending on the exchange, you might have to produce huge amount of documentation, at least about the last 3 to 5 years of your activities, and they'll check whether you are worthy of listing. Okay, so I go through this process, and then does it mean that I can then go to London Stock Exchange and sell my shares? No, because you have to be a licensed broker and trader to do that. I cannot sell those shares myself. Right after the eruption of the 2008 financial crisis, many countries shut down their stock market. It's known as holidays. Basically, to calm the nerves, they shut down these markets. So even in the stock market, there are so many regulations telling you what you can do, what you cannot do, who can do it, who cannot do it. And when it comes to other markets, there are even more restrictions because this is one of the freest markets. So in many countries, you are not allowed to trade in addictive drugs or human organs or human beings. Yeah, but when you think about it, why not? I'm told that in Iran that you can sell your kidney legally. Until the 1960s and 70s, in most countries, you could patent a drug invented by someone else as far as you make it through a different process. So traditionally in chemical and pharmaceutical industries, there were these two notions of patents. One is product patent, so invention of a chemical substance that can act on certain diseases, and the process patent, having identified the chemical, how you make it. And most countries actually gave only process patent because the reasoning was that, well, we cannot give you product patent because this chemical has always existed in nature, which is why countries like India, Brazil, and Thailand could produce these copy drugs with impunity because, as far as you make it through a different chemical process, you could do it. How you deal with fraud, how you deal with bankruptcy, if some company that has been supplying you goes bankrupt, how do you get compensation? There's a huge range of issues that need legal regulation. And all of these regulations are based on some notions of justice, some notions of what is someone's right and someone's obligation. And basically, the conclusion is that we think a market is free only because we so totally accept the underlying political and even ethical assumptions that create this body of regulations that define that market, that we stop seeing them.
That's a point I will end on Hao-Chu Chang. I don't want to continue streaming the content given a variety of different reasons of copyright and all that stuff, but check out the full playlist. There are probably, segments we'll cut out to compile videos and lessons over. I want to say, where am I? Let's exit out. There we go. So where are we? We're a few, almost 2 hours in. And that's fine. We're going to do book recommendations in just a moment, but definitely check out Hao Zhiqiang, the rest of the course's video playlist that is located on the SuperPeer channel, superpeer.com/RafiBajat. Let me put my banner up there so you can see my name. All right, and the book that we were covering, real quick, I said we'll just read off the contents, the actual 23 things. That's a spoiler alert, but oh well. I will say the title of the chapter, and you can go and read it yourself by purchasing the book. I don't have an Amazon affiliate link at the moment. But just to reiterate, you should definitely read and watch Hao Zhiqiang, support his work. It's a lot of stating of facts that arrives at the point of perspective. So if you do disagree with his conclusions, acknowledge that there's a volume of work that tries to solidify his point. Very thorough book is what I'm implying in short. It's not like I'm asking you to go and read, Capital Volume 1. Look up, bruh. No. Anyway, thing number 1, there's no such thing as a free market. Thing number 2, companies should not be run in the interests of their owners. Thing number 3, most people in rich countries are paid more than they should be. Thing number 4, the washing machine has changed the world more than the internet has. Thing number 5, assume the worst about people and you get the worst. That's good. Thing number 6, greater macroeconomic stability has not made the world economy more stable. Thing number 7, free market policies rarely make poor countries rich. Thing number 8, capital has a nationality. It's American. Thing number 9, we do not live in a post-industrial age. Thing number 10, the US does not have the highest living standard in the world. Thing 11, Africa is not destined for underdevelopment. Again, we hit on Walter Rodney in the past. It's up there on my bookshelf, but Walter Rodney's work in how Europe underdeveloped Africa is one of the most important reads. If you are to understand the modern economy, that's where you go first. It's a crossroads between, right before neoliberalism and the conditions that led to the current economic paradigm. Governments can pick winners, which is thing 12. Thing 13, making rich people richer doesn't make the rest of us richer. Thing 14, US managers are overpriced. That's very true. Middle management is so overrated. Thing 15, people in poor countries are more entrepreneurial than people in rich countries. Now, that may or not contrast. I have to double check on the Latin literature, but it is perspective. Again, someone from Cambridge may or may not understand the struggles of the 70s and 60s Brazil, which forced, via the military junta that, established itself until 1990. it's a lot of perspective that can or cannot be included in just a simple academic overview. You have to get the boots on the ground testimonials that Clodomir actually incorporates into his body of literature. Thing 16, we are not smart enough to leave things to the market. Thing 17, more education in itself is not going to make a country richer. Absolutely true. You could propagandize people very quickly to believe the same thing over and over again. Thing 18, what is good for General Motors is not necessarily good for the United States. Boeing is that modern interpretation. Thing 19, despite the fall of communism, we are still living in planned economies. That's absolutely true. Just a spoiler of it, it's the U.S. has always been a planned economy. Why do we fund the government in the first place? Even then, it's superficial to say that, because you could just look at a budget and get an idea that yes, it's planned, but the politics of what gets into the plan for continuous, future management is the subject of the area of public administration. Thing 19, thing 20, equality of opportunity may not be fair. Thing 21, big government makes people more open to change. And genocide as well. Thing 22, financial markets need to become less, not more efficient. Bullshit jobs is the implication there. Thing 23, good economic policy does not require a good economist. That's true. Kramer will lead you off into the deep end so he could profit off of you. Okay, so that was Haiju Chang's work. Definitely check out the rest of the series, as I mentioned, and 23 things they don't tell you about capitalism. Mutual aid, it's free on the anarchistlibrary.com. Very important work. I'm just going to speed through this because 2-hour stream is pretty long. I'm tired. This is pretty engaging. Future for the Excluded, Clodomir Santos de Moraes, and the Organization Workshop. We will cover this book extensively in capacitation development, which is one of the goals of the Sangha. Richard Wolff's work, Democracy at Work, A Care for Capitalism, a great and straightforward read to labor organization. Jarl Marx, you already know. I find someone else to summarize it, because I would probably build a database highlighting the rules of his thought in sources, the evolution of Marxist thought during his lifetime was certainly, whether it's being a young Hegelian to whatever you want to call him at, towards the end of his life, he definitely had a significant impact on economic theory, political theory, and the general encompass of how to organize a society in general. So his work is significant. You can't ignore it. Go and read it. Get a precursor of it. Make your own thoughts. Don't be afraid to think. I can't even talk about this today, but understanding media and just McLuhan's work is going to be an entire episode. Yeah, it has to be its own multi-series, actually. But find the book if you can. It's a wonderful read that you're probably not going to do and resort to videos of him talking through his work that is very difficult to understand. And Donut Economics, which is Kate Raworth's book on a donut economy, which is the premise of the economy. So that will be a continuation for next time. And of course, David Graeber's work, Debt, the First 5,000 Years, the history of debt and credit systems, bullshit jobs, and the majority of the economy is going to be automated to just sell you bullshit. So there's probably a continuation of his work there. And Utopia of Rules, of Technology, Stupidity, and the Secrets of Joys of Bureaucracy highlights a lot of literature and observations of the past, and just managerial, the managerial nature of capitalist economies. So I got a hurricane's going in here, so I will let you figure out the next stream. You'll see it. If not, then we'll figure it out. Yeah, so thank you for joining me. I definitely do encourage you to watch the remaining aspects of Haiju Chang's playlist listed on the Superclass series in my profile and Super Peer profile, that is. And have a good day. If you are in Florida, let's take a look at NOAA. Let's do this live and see. Yeah, this is the worst website the most important website, obviously, to go and find out news and information regarding a hurricane. However, this is an atrocity for UX UI design. Help improve this website. Yeah. No. I mean, I agree, but it's just how it's presented. Tools or services, general public, UX, UI, design of the website needs to be improved as there is no significant call to action that relate to life critical guides or warnings. It is a navigation nightmare. It's, .com. Milton. Finding out stuff. Milton. Ain't nobody's gonna get back to me about that. I want to improve this website. It's such a trash, looking thing. Let's go through it. So first and foremost, isn't that wild? So look at my mouse cursor. Okay, so you know that you have to click on the H2 or whatever. What element are you? Is it an H2? I don't know. Anyway, so you gotta click on there, and then it's like, okay,